The moment I stepped into my father's office, the air felt heavier than usual, thick with secrets. I had no right to know, papers scattered like storm. Debris across his mahogany desk, his face pale, almost unreadable, and I knew instantly something was broken beyond repair. My hands shook as I reached for the letter stamped with the law firm's seal. Every instinct screaming danger, betrayal, money, a trap I could not yet see. My name is Elena Cross, 28, sharp, stubborn, and stubbornly ethical in a world that seemed to thrive on moral bankruptcy. I make my living untangling impossible corporate knots, but nothing in any boardroom prepared me for discovering my father, the man I admired, drowning under hidden debts, blackmail letters, and threats from the shadows of the city, and now his empire, the legacy he promised, was dangling over a cliff with me as the only one who could decide if it survives or crumbles. I remember standing there, gripping the letter so tight my knuckles hurt, feeling the weight of his failures pressing into my chest like iron chains, thinking how everything I believed in, everything I had worked to honor in my family and my career, collided in one devastating moment. My phone buzzed with a message from a corporate associate, hinting at deals I would never agree to, choices I would never consider. And I knew instantly that his enemies were not just numbers on a spreadsheet, they were alive, patient, and poised to use me as leverage. And yet, even as fear twisted my stomach into knots, I felt a spark, a dangerous thrill of control, of justice that I could command, because if anyone was going to salvage this mess, it would be me. But the question lingered like smoke in the air. How much of my soul would I have to compromise to save what was rightfully mine? The office lights flickered, and in the shadow of a painting of my father smiling when he was younger, wealthier, cleaner, I made my first unspoken vow. I would uncover every secret, face every threat, and if the cost of my inheritance was more than I could bear, then I would fight anyway, because giving up was never an option for me. I tucked the letter into my coat pocket, my heart pounding like a drum, and as the elevator doors closed behind me, I realized that this was not just about money, it was about trust, betrayal, and the collision of ideals that had defined my life. And somewhere deep down, I knew that one wrong step could mean losing everything, and worse, losing myself in the process. Stay with me, because what happens next will change everything. I never realized how complicated love and loyalty could be until my father's debts dragged me into a world I only ever glimpsed from the edges. My childhood memories of dinners in the grand dining hall now mixed with whispered arguments I was never meant to hear. My mother long gone, leaving me with a father whose pride often felt like a wall too high to climb. And yet, despite everything, I had always believed in his vision, in the family name I carried, until now. My colleagues at the firm, a mix of admiration and subtle envy, watched me with curious eyes. Some offering help with faint smiles, others calculating how my mistakes could become their advantage. And I felt the sting of ambition not just around me but inside me, questioning if I was too principled for a world that rewarded compromise and silence, and how many battles I had lost without realizing it, letting ethics outweigh opportunity. My closest friend, Mara, had been a lifeline, offering advice I sometimes ignored. And I remembered the nights we stayed late at her apartment, poring over financial reports and legal loopholes, laughing through exhaustion, unaware that the real challenges waited not in spreadsheets but in family secrets. And in moments like that, I understood why trust felt so fragile, how easily loyalty could turn into leverage, and how deeply betrayal could cut when disguised as protection. Even my father's right-hand man, someone I had considered an ally, now seemed suspicious, glances too sharp, words too measured, as if he had always known more than he shared, and I began to see patterns. I had ignored favors that came with strings, smiles that hid warnings, and a web of connections, thick enough to trap anyone who moved too quickly. I reflected on my own missteps, the times I had chosen principle over pragmatism, idealism over caution, and wondered if that had prepared me for this mess, or only made it more dangerous, because in his world, nothing was simple, nothing fair, and every relationship carried a price. The old family house with its silent corridors and locked rooms became a metaphor for my life. Open doors. I thought I understood secrets behind walls I could not break, and shadows of decisions I would have to make, knowing each choice would ripple through the people I loved or used to love. And yet, despite all this tension, I could not walk away, not from my inheritance, not from the truth, not from the subtle obligations I had inherited along with the fortune. Because somewhere beneath resentment and fear, I felt a responsibility that both strengthened and terrified me. As I sat in my apartment that night reviewing emails, calls, and hints left behind by people I once trusted, I realized the storm was only beginning, and that every connection I had, friend, employee, family, was a thread I could pull to either unravel or repair everything. And somewhere in the quiet, I heard the soft tick of the clock reminding me that time was short, that loyalty and betrayal often walked hand in hand, and that the choices ahead would define me in ways I had not yet imagined, leaving me to wonder if anyone around me could be trusted, and if my father's secrets were only the first layer of the battle I was about to face. The call came just as I was poring over the last of my father's financial statements, a number on the page that did not add up, glaring at me like a warning, and when I answered, the voice on the other end was smooth, controlled, and somehow familiar, telling me that unless certain arrangements were made, the family name I had tried to honor would vanish, and for the first time, I felt fear curl in my chest, twisting with anger and disbelief. I had always believed in doing what was right, in facing challenges head-on, but now I realized principle might cost me everything, and as I sat at my desk, the city lights flickering against the window, I wondered how many people I thought were allies were quietly watching, waiting for me to falter, calculating which move would break me first. Even the law firm that had helped my father now seemed like a maze of hidden motives, each email and note a reminder that trust was fragile, that greed could hide behind courtesy, and that every decision I made carried consequences I could not yet predict. I thought of Mara, my friend, who had warned me about getting too close to family business, who had cautioned me to keep my moral compass but also prepare for compromise, and I hated that even she could not shield me from the reality of betrayal that had been brewing beneath polite smiles and office pleasantries. Then there was my father's assistant, a man I had known since childhood who now avoided my gaze in ways that screamed guilt, whose every movement suggested he had hidden knowledge secrets I might never uncover without pushing too far, and the thought made my stomach tighten, because I had no guarantee that my choices would save anything, only that wrong moves could destroy everything. I paced the apartment, papers in hand, trying to make sense of numbers that danced just out of reach. And the thought struck me, what if doing what is right was no longer enough? What if protecting my family meant bending rules I swore I would never touch? What if the price of my inheritance was the compromise of my own principles? My hands shook as I considered the options, each one uglier than the last, each one carrying consequences I was only beginning to understand, and somewhere deep down, a voice whispered that hesitation could be as deadly as making the wrong choice. And just as I began to draft an email, a subtle ping from my phone drew my attention. A new message from an unknown number. I thought I could control the situation, steer it carefully through murky waters. But as soon as I responded to the blackmail demands, the consequences hit like waves against rock, small at first, subtle shifts in tone from colleagues, hints of distrust from Mara, even the firm's emails carried an edge I could not ignore. And suddenly, every move I made felt exposed, weighed, measured, as if invisible eyes were cataloging my hesitation and my ambition alike. My father's debts were not just numbers anymore. They were traps, pulling strings in places I had never imagined, and each decision I made, each compromise I allowed, created ripples that threatened to drown the people I cared about, my principles clashing with survival. And I began to realize that keeping my moral compass intact might mean losing the very empire I was trying to protect. Late nights at the office blurred into early mornings, and I watched as alliances shifted, emails arrived with hidden subtext, and messages from unknown contacts hinted at moves I had not anticipated, pressure twisting my mind until I questioned every handshake. Every word, every smile, and even Mara's reassurances felt like they carried warnings I could not decipher. I began to play my own game, balancing honesty and strategy, giving answers that sounded principled but held hidden edges, maneuvering through phone calls, meetings, and financial reports with the knowledge that someone, somewhere was watching, and yet every move I made carried risk, and every risk threatened more than money. Trust, love, friendship, the fragile web that connected me to people who mattered. One night, as I reviewed documents in the dim glow of my apartment, a familiar name appeared in an email trail that I had overlooked before, suggesting a betrayal I had never suspected, a link between my father's debts and someone I had trusted completely. Yet even as fear gripped me, a part of me thrived on the challenge, the dangerous clarity that came from knowing stakes. This high demanded courage, wit, and resolve beyond what I thought I possessed, and I could feel the pulse of the storm building around me, the city lights outside flickering like warnings. Every shadow a reminder that the next move could change everything. I closed my laptop, heart pounding, aware that I was dancing on the edge of collapse, that every alliance could crumble, every secret could explode. And the game I had been forced into was far from over, leaving me in a silence thick with anticipation, waiting for the next strike, knowing it would come, and knowing that when it did, I would have to decide who I was willing to risk to save what I could. I thought I understood the scope of my father's mistakes, the debts, the threats, the carefully concealed manipulations, but the moment I opened the envelope delivered without warning, nudged into place by forces I had never suspected. Every choice, every compromise, every moral stand threaded through a tapestry of calculated control. And I knew that if I could navigate it correctly, I could turn the game around, not just for myself, but for the legacy I had fought so hard to protect. And just as I began to organize my thoughts, a second envelope slipped silently under the door, smaller, heavier, and marked only with a single symbol I recognized from my father's old files, a warning, a challenge, or perhaps a revelation even deeper than the first. And that the next discovery could change everything again, leaving the questions unanswered, the threats alive, and the stakes higher than I had ever imagined, because some secrets were designed not to be solved, only survived. The envelope trembled in my hands as if it carried the weight of the world, my pulse hammering, every instinct screaming caution, every principle pulling me toward honesty, even as the evidence tempted me to bend, to negotiate, to use secrets as leverage. And I knew in that instant that the decision I made now would ripple through everything I had ever valued, my family, my friendships, my career, and even the inheritance I had fought to protect. I thought of Mara, waiting outside, unaware of the storm, trusting me to navigate a path I could barely see, and of the colleagues who had watched me stumble and rise, silently calculating whether I was strong enough to survive this game. And I realized that no choice would leave everyone untouched, that every action carried a shadow of consequence, and yet, hesitation was no longer an option. I remembered my father's legacy, not just the fortune, but the principles he had tried to instill, tangled with the compromises he had hidden from me, and I understood that protecting his name required more than compliance. It required courage, strategy, and the willingness to accept loss as part of the cost. My hands shook as I drafted a single message, precise and measured, revealing some truths, concealing others, calling out the manipulations while offering a path to resolution, knowing it could make allies or enemies in the same breath, and that the wrong wording, the slightest misstep, could unravel months of effort. When I pressed send, the world seemed to hold its breath silence, filling the apartment like the calm before a storm, and I realized that I had crossed a line from which there was no return, that I had chosen a path between integrity and pragmatism, between survival and principle, and that I would bear the consequences of this choice, good and bad, for months, perhaps years. Within hours, responses started to trickle in, some cautiously appreciative, others tense. Veiled threats and polite language, and even Mara's eyes reflected worry and relief. Knowing I had acted decisively, yet risking everything, including the trust I had built with people whose motives were still unclear, I felt exhaustion, yes, but also a strange clarity. A quiet satisfaction that I had chosen action over paralysis. That I had shaped the story rather than letting it dictate itself. And even if the fallout was unpredictable, even if alliances would fracture, reputations shift, and secrets emerge, I knew I had acted in alignment with the values I could not compromise. As night fell and the city lights glimmered against the glass, I allowed myself a single breath, slow, measured, a reminder that choices define us more than outcomes, that courage is often uncomfortable, and that while the journey ahead remained uncertain, for the first time since discovering the debts and blackmail, I felt a measure of control, a spark of empowerment, because I had decided, fully, knowingly, and without regret. And the echo of that decision would carry me forward, reshaping alliances, revealing hidden truths, and setting the stage for the battles still to come, leaving me aware that life, like the inheritance I had claimed, was never simple, always demanding, and infinitely more precious when guided by deliberate action. After the storm had passed, after decisions were made and secrets revealed, I found myself alone in the quiet of my apartment, the city outside, moving with its usual rhythm, indifferent to the battles I had just fought, and I realized how much I had grown, how much the weight of responsibility had reshaped me in ways I could not have anticipated, teaching me lessons I would carry for the rest of my life. Trust, I understood, was not given lightly, not just in business or family, but within oneself. And the betrayal I had witnessed, the manipulation I had navigated, had forced me to learn how to recognize loyalty and deceit not as absolutes, but as shades of intention, each interaction a choice between understanding and suspicion. I reflected on the relationships that had mattered most, Mara, whose presence reminded me that even amidst chaos, genuine support exists. Colleagues whose ambitions had threatened and taught me in equal measure. And even my father, whose flaws had shaped the inheritance I claimed not just in wealth but in insight, understanding, and resilience. And I realized that boundaries, the courage to protect them, and the willingness to act decisively, when they are crossed, a quiet certainty that life's challenges, however complex, are opportunities to discover strength, judgment, and resilience we never knew we possessed. And I turned to the audience, my voice steady and reflective, asking if, faced with choices that tested your principles, your loyalties, and your limits, what would you have done in my place? Because in the end, the story is not just about inheritance debts or betrayal, but about how we navigate the collision of morality and survival, and what we take with us from the chaos when the dust finally settles, leaving us wiser, stronger, and more aware of both the risks and the rewards that life demands.